Ole Gunnar Solskjær has been speaking for the first time since his Manchester United sacking back in 2021. Ole Gunnar Solskjær. And I know you got your own views of Ole, not so much Ole the player, but more Ole the manager. More specifically, Ole the Manchester United manager. And yet when you think of it, when Manchester United and Ole were reunited, this seemed like a marriage made in heaven.
You know, as a player, I gave everything I had, and now walking out, leading the team, just being part of this team, because that's what I am. I'm part of a huge team. We're playing for the supporters, we're playing for our pride, we're playing for the club's history. But to be honest, it's going to be very, very special, I have to say. I'm good at controlling the emotions, so I won't be that emotional, but when I came back with Cardiff a few years ago, in 2014, it was a strange feeling. One of the most surrealistic feelings I've had, being on the other side. Now I'm on the right side, and I can't wait for it.
So he was all ready, and he was thoroughly looking forward to what lay ahead.
He's good at controlling his emotions. I suppose he had plenty of practice sitting on a bench for most of his career. Right,
well, listen to this, though. I mean, what Ole wanted to do and what he ended up doing were two totally different things. Because in this interview with The Athletic, on failed transfers, and we mentioned this, Cavi mentions this in the book. It comes out next month, but enough plugs of that. We couldn't buy the players I mentioned to the club. Erling Haaland, before he made his Salzburg debut. Declan Rice, who wouldn't have cost what he did in the summer. We discussed Moises Caicedo, but we felt we needed players ready for the there and then. We wanted Bellingham badly. He's a Manchester United player, but I respect that he chose Borussia Dortmund. On and on it goes. He says, I would have signed Kane every day of the week. And my understanding...
He wasn't for sale then, was he?
My understanding was that he wanted to come.
Thing to say.
But the club didn't have the budget with the financial constraints from COVID, and there was no bottomless pit. Honestly, when you hear that, in spite of his best intentions, it was United who put out the big stop right there, Ole. That's as far as you go with those names, and no further. So, top of the house, it was the Glazers, no doubt, who were saying, no, not on this occasion, Ole. Not him, or him.
From his version of events, who signed Jadon Sancho?
Ole.
£75 million player. So we are suggesting that they...
You're judging him in one bad signing?
No, I'm sure that if I actually bothered to look underneath the bonnet and see how many players he signed, to see how many of them been massively successful, then we'd have a different discussion. If indeed this version of events, which is his version of events...
Why would you doubt that?
Well, because it's unchallenged and it paints him in the best possible light, and he's popping his head above the parapet because there's a reason for it now. I don't know what that reason might be. He wants to get himself...
He's not going to say if it's not true.
Well...
Why would he?
Oh, really?
And incidentally, you don't challenge the Glazers much.
We don't spend our time debunking some of the nonsense that goes out there on a daily basis from self-serving people trying to advance themselves. Of course, there may well be an alternate side to this. I'm not defending the Glazers. If they've missed the opportunity to sign Erling Haaland and Declan Rice and Moises Caicedo because of the brilliant scouting network that Ole Gunnar Solskjær put in place and the insight and the foresight that he would have had, then woe... terrible upon them.
Can you imagine if United had got Haaland in the door before he went to Salzburg?
Yeah, can you imagine?
Can you imagine if they got Declan?
Can you imagine what the cost implications of Erling Haaland would have been at that time, as opposed to the 50-odd million quid that Man City paid, a fraction of that, and the ramifications of that decision-making process for Manchester United, that he had so little sway, so little cachet, so little influence over people that he probably couldn't get 20-30 million pound transfers done for a club that frequently spends inordinate amounts of money, has proven to spend inordinate amounts of money, has spent more money than anybody else in the world football in the last 10 years, yet he couldn't sell it to them. So rather than say to people, look at the players that have now arrived, look at the visions that have arrived, because I'm going to index myself to them to show you how much foresight I had, you might want to ask yourself why you had the inability to sell it to those that had the authority to sanction these kind of transactions. But maybe it's because they didn't have enough faith in you. Maybe it's because really when it comes down to it, you weren't that much of a manager in terms of the ability to be able to attach gravitas and cachet to your opinion.
But have you not laid at the feet of Ole the demise of standards within the football club when he was there?
Not just him. Ultimately, those are...
Yeah, what about the players?
Well, of course.
But who seem to down tools.
Team reflects leadership.
He says on the players, Some weren't as good as their own perception of themselves. I won't name names, but I was very disappointed when a couple turned down the chance to be captain.
Get in there. Go hard or go home. Why don't you say who it is then?
Not for me, thanks,
Another,
Ole.
another one of those anonymous drive-bys. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I'm going to give you the overview. Why don't you say who it is then?
Stop
Why don't
doing
you
your Groucho
Why don't you
Marx
have the
impersonation.
courage of your convictions?
He says, I was
say,
also disappointed when others said they wouldn't play or train because they wanted to force their way out.
no respect for the culture of the environment that was Manchester United. Who
That's
wants,
not Solskjaer's
Who
fault.
wants to... It is in part.
Solskjaer won them the European Cup. These players should have said, Ole,
He scored a goal that contributed
I
to the
will
winning of the
play for you.
He scored a goal that contributed to the winning of the
He was
European
on the spot
Cup.
to put it in the roof
He
of the
was.
net.
He came off the bench, which was his standard position,
Steady.
and came on and scored a goal alongside Teddy Sheringham.
He's lauded as a man who won them.
Fantastic. He
But
was
what about these players? What about these players?
Well,
Two of them said, captaincy, not for me, Ole, but thanks for the offer. And others were saying, I'm not going to play or train
would you
at
ask
this
somebody-
time because I want out.
Why would you have so little insight to people that you were offering people the captaincy and they didn't want it? I mean, who wouldn't want the captaincy of Manchester United? I know. I don't want to be captain for him, thanks very much. All right? Why would somebody that gets an opportunity... I spent, as you will see today on my wonderful podcast, ages talking to Steve Bruce about the captaincy of Manchester United and what it meant. And yet you've got, in this incarnation, people going, not for me, thanks.
Whose
What does that
dressing
tell you?
room did Ole inherit? I'll tell you.
Mourinho's.
Correct.
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
It tells you lots of things.
Ole walked into a bunch of people with their feet up.
It tells you that at the end of Mourinho's tenure, there was lots of things that were wrong.
Yeah.
It tells you that at the beginning of Mourinho's tenure, when they got, I think, second in the league, and they won 2 trophies, that potentially things were going right, and that things at the end of the Mourinho's tenure went wrong. Now, no doubt, that's the reason why Mourinho was fifth, right?
Maybe he was behind the demise.
What happens with new brooms? They tend to sweep the cleanest. So you come in and you lay your stall out. What did Tuchel do when he walked in the door after Lampard? He got that ship shape and got that team focusing the right way. And what did Chelsea do 4 months later? They won the Champions League.
Yeah.
Okay, his standards might have dropped, his attitude might have put him in odds with Todd Bowley 18 months later. But what did he do when he walked through the door?
Yeah, but Simon,
he changed the attitude of Chelsea.
Solskjaer speaking here to the Athletic shows that it wasn't all down to him, the mess that ensued. It was not. He inherited a lot of it.
No, of course, but what you do with the problems that you've got, like Postecoglou, is you change, for want of an overused expression, the direction of travel. You change the culture. You concentrate people's minds because you're a leader and they understand what leading looks like. What he is doing, and to some extent what may well be what Ten Hag is doing, is finding himself in a situation where they don't have the characteristics of real leaders to be able to make that dressing room understand there's a new sheriff in town. This is how it works. This is how we go. And when you ask somebody to be a captain of your team, it's because you've got an insight they might want to do that bleeding job. Now you've got 2 of them turning it down. I mean, it's embarrassing. I've got people queuing up not to be my captain. I mean, what does that say about the leadership of the individual that's responsible for the culture of the football team? You can't blame that on owners and chief executives, because on one hand you say, keep your bleeding nose out of our business. The last thing we want is football club directors anywhere near the landscape of football. Okay, what's the culture like? Well, it stinks and it's your fault. Well, how does that work then?
Yeah, but maybe if they got some of the players that Ole wanted, Haaland, Rice, Caicedo, Bellingham, might have been a bit different.
Says he wants.
Got a few leaders in there, haven't you? Declan, do you want to be captain of Manchester United?
Says that he wanted, and says that he was on point with, and says that they could have gotten. But again, I go back to the question: why couldn't you sell it? Why couldn't you sit there in front of those that have the checkbooks that are spending on average 170 million a year and go, I tell you what, I want this player and I want that player, and they're so economic. Where's the barrier to entry for this? Why would you stop me? I can nick Haaland. He's a £20 million footballer or a £30 million footballer. We drop that out of our pockets on the way into the stadium. Caicedo was bought by Brighton for £4.5 million. What are we talking about here?
Okay.
Come on.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.